They're just coming in. Hello, everybody. We're just giving it a second while people settle in, and then we'll get started. Hello, just giving it a moment. Ariel, are you recording?
It says it's recording in the top left corner. I didn't hit record though.
Okay. Oh yeah, I guess I put it automatic. All right, people are still coming in, so I'm gonna give it a moment. Okay, looks like it's settled. So hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Jimena Perez. I am the outreach coordinator in New York for the Long Island Sound Study National Estuary Program. This webinar is part of our Community Science Long Island webinar series, which is brought to you in partnership with CTUC, specifically my partner in crime, Ariel Santos, CTUC's policy program coordinator, who joins me today as a fellow facilitator for this webinar. The Community Science Long Island series has been happening since January and will go on through July. We're highlighting different volunteer monitoring programs that are happening every month. And we're discussing how those programs influence local environmental management decisions and research. So recordings for past webinars are available in the Community Science webinar website, which Ariel can post in the chat. And of course, today's topic is water quality monitoring, specifically the Unified Water Study. So today we are joined to talk about that by our guest speakers, Peter Linderoth and Katie O'Brien-Clayton. Peter Linderoth is the Director of Water Quality at Save the Sound. He's been with Save the Sound since 2015, where he generates and processes data to garner a better understanding of water quality challenges that currently face Long Island Sound. This understanding is accomplished with Save the Sound staff and a dedicated body of citizen scientists that are just as eager as Peter to identify and remediate those threats to sustainable future of Long Island Sound. Peter has a bachelor's in environmental studies from the University of California at Santa Barbara and a master's in environmental science and management from Sacred Heart University. He's part of many groups, but among them, the Long Island Sound Study Water Quality Monitoring Work Group, and he is the committee chair for the Village of Mamaroneck Marine Education Center Advisory Committee. Katie is an environmental analyst with Connecticut DEEP, or the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, and she's been with them since 2006, where in addition to conducting water quality monitoring aboard the research vessel John Dempsey, she is responsible for reviewing the quality of those data collected by volunteers and conducting what are called 305B assessments, which she'll talk about soon. She is also part of the Long Island Sound Study Water Quality Work Group, and in 2019 was the Connecticut Volunteer Monitoring Conference co-chair. She holds a bachelor's in marine science biology from Southampton College. So we thank our speakers today for joining us. We're excited to have you. So before we hand it over to them, just a couple of details. Number one is that this webinar is being recorded, so just be advised. Those recordings, like I said, will be available in the Community Science webpage in a couple of days. Because this is a webinar format, your videos and mics should be turned off, so no worries there. We can't see you or hear you, but if you want to communicate with us, you can do so via the chat. Feel free to share resources or any comments. And if you have any questions, please drop them in the Q&A, which you should find a button on the bottom of your screen to do so. And one more thing before I hand it over to our guests. I just have a couple of polls for you. If I could find the Zoom thing. And here we go. So you should see a poll on your screen. So go ahead and answer that, and I'll give you a minute to read that and answer. All right, results are coming in. All right, halfway there. All right. Almost. Results are still coming in. All right, so I'll end it there. So it looks like most people want to learn about the water quality work being done in their region. So that's good to hear. We have somebody who's interested in volunteering, so that's really exciting to hear. And I always wonder what those others are, but we're glad for all the curious people who are just here to learn. And hypoxia, it looks like most people know what hypoxia is, so that's fantastic. And really common to confuse hypoxia for anoxia, which is that first one there. All right, so with that, I will hand it over to you, Peter.
Great, thank you. I think you have to, yeah. Perfect. And I know that none of the Save the Sound team on the call right now missed that pop quiz on hypoxia. I see a couple of our staffers that joined. I'll be checking though. You thought it was anonymous, but it's not. So anyhow, this is Peter Linderoth, Director of Water Quality with Save the Sound. Amanda, thanks so much for inviting me and Katie to talk today. It's going to be a lot of fun. I look forward to a good discussion. I did get a sneak peek at the participants. I saw a lot of Save the Sound and Unified Water Study family and partners on the call. So thank you all for joining, and everyone else. So I've been working with Save the Sound. This is like pretty much my 6-year anniversary this week, and it's just such a great place to be and to be working. I love Long Island Sound. I grew up on it, fishing, swimming, you know, you name it, boating. I was here in the 80s when it was really struggling with environmental health, and then I'm here now as we're seeing some improvements in the open water of the Sound. And Save the Sound is a regional organization. We work on protecting and restoring Long Island Sound and its watershed. And while I oversee our water quality monitoring program, and my team of environmental scientists are out there conducting monitoring work, we have attorneys and engineers and legislative advocates. And it's such a great place to work. I mean, and we all collaborate to do what we can for Long Island Sound, and rely on a lot of our partners too as we collaborate on projects. This picture, I was actually just out this morning training some staff. It's the same thing I saw, even though this picture is a year ago. Be it like a nice day like today or a very choppy day coming out of Miniford Marina, you probably can't see it, but the boat there is called the Optimist, which is always a nice thing to see as we're leaving the marina heading out to do some monitoring work. So today I'll be talking about the Long Island Sound report card. It's hard to talk about the Unified Water Study without a little discussion on the report card. Then I'm going to get into the UWS Unified Water Study, a little bit on data to action, and then actually we're going to do questions either in the Q&A box or after Katie and I both talk. So hold on to those questions if you have them, or put them in the Q&A box. So the Long Island Sound report card, we, in a very friendly handoff from the University of Maryland, adopted the Long Island Sound report card, which grades the ecological health of Long Island Sound. Our first release of the report card, which wasn't the first overall, but Save the Sound's first go at it, was in 2016. We changed the parameters a little bit using a technical advisory committee of stakeholders around the Sound, from academics, regulatory groups, nonprofits in that year. And then in 2018, so you're looking at the covers here, it's a biennial release, or every 2 years. 2018, we did this deep dive into the data available and did this 10-year analysis with statistical, kind of non-parametric statistical tests applied to those data and the grades, and kind of went back and identified some trends. And then in 2020, which just came out in October, we added bay grades or embayment grades, which are, the bays and harbors around the sound. And that's where the Unified Water Study came in. And I'll be talking about that shortly. It's a fourfold report. You see the cover, if you open it up, here I am doing what I do best, blabbing, of course, talking about the Unified Water Study on one of the pages. But we also have actions that people can take to improve water quality in their areas and their regions. And we do a shout out to the Sound Health Explorer, which I'll be talking about, where Unified Water Study data live, but also beach data and grades for the 200 plus beaches around Long Island Sound. That's related to human health, different than the Unified Water Study. And then here's the opening kind of inside poster version, I guess you could say, of the most recent report card. I'm not here to talk a ton about that today, but if you have questions about it in the Q&A, I'd be happy to. You can see our open water sections, the Eastern Basin, Central Basin, working all the way to the Western Narrows. There's a pretty much anticipated east to west gradient in water quality in Long Island Sound that's due to flushing with the Atlantic Ocean, and also nitrogen and population density as you move west into Long Island Sound. There's frankly just a lot more people, more toilets, more this and that are producing nitrogen. So it becomes a little bit more challenging in addition to just natural features, like it becomes more and more like narrow, I guess you could say, less and less flushed with the Atlantic Ocean. As I mentioned, we do statistical kind of Kendall-Tau statistical analyses on the regions and their grades. So you can see we've applied kind of if things are stable or if they're kind of rocky. And then these dots, I feel our design team did a fantastic job with this, but these dots represent the bay grades, and those can be segments. Like in Norwalk Harbor, we provide 3 grades for the outer, middle, and inner portion, which is important because they have different things going on, and some of them have multiple segments based on size and water quality data. And then some of the smaller ones just have one segment. But these are all the bay grades for the sound, and not quite the same east to west gradient. You can see there's a poor grade out here in Eastern Connecticut, Wickety-Quack Cove. A lot of local nitrogen issues there. They have big mats of seaweed. Definitely a place for nitrogen reduction. But for the most part, you also do see some east to west gradient as you go east to west. And I want to thank the data providers, and this is going to get us into the Unified Water Study. The open water data is provided by Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. So that's Katie, Matt Lyman, in this picture in the bottom right. I went out with them, I think it was 2 winters ago. On the Dempsey, and Katie will be talking about that. They collect a lot of data, and they have been for over 2 decades in the open sound, going into the Western Sound. And then we've got New York City DEP, which does obviously water quality monitoring in New York City waters, and Interstate Environmental Commission that kind of bridges some of the spaces between those two and adds some data density. And then all these other pictures are Unified Water Study groups, either at trainings, like this one up here, or doing chlorophyll filters. I know our Darien group's on today. Here's one of the Darien samplers, and just out doing what we do. And that's water quality monitoring in bays and harbors. So what is the UWS? So there's an abundant data in the open waters of Long Island Sound. We're really fortunate to have a lot of really great open water, kind of open, middle of the sound type water quality data, and moving into the coast a little bit too. And I just mentioned who's providing those data. There's over that's not true. There's over 100 bays and harbors, let's say, in Long Island Sound. And so there's not the same data density, the same programs in place. And there certainly wasn't before the Unified Water Study came in. And this study is designed to fill those margins, kind of filling in some data gaps that existed in the bays and harbors with routine, year to year to year and onward, high quality water quality monitoring. So here are all the bays or embayments. I'm going to switch to embayments. All the embayments in Long Island Sound, they're light blue, as you see on here. So there's plenty of them there too. That's the other thing that's a challenge in getting into a lot of them, is there's frankly a lot of embayments. And this kind of kaleidoscope looking thing are the sub-watersheds that drain into those embayments. So this study was designed specifically to assess ecological health. So you're not going to see fecal indicator bacteria like E. coli, for example, in the UWS. And it was also designed to be achievable for community water monitoring groups. And that's like traditional kind of nonprofits like Save the Sound, but we also have municipalities like the town of Darien, the town of Stratford, the town of Fairfield that participate. Interstate Environmental Commission is one of our groups as well. Director Shipyard, a private group is also, private business is also in the study. And when we designed this, and it wasn't Save the Sound on our own, kind of working and just kind of dictating how things go, this was a very collective process. But when the study was designed, we all kept in mind we need to make this achievable and still deliver important data. And so as we were going through that process, it was apparent as literally probably 100 parameters came up at any given time that we needed to split it into 2 tiers. So all the groups in the Unified Water Study, this community sampling effort, do the tier 1 monitoring that you're seeing on the screen here. And that's dissolved oxygen, very important aquatic life indicator for sustaining things like fish and shellfish and other really important aquatic life that live in the sound. Turbidity, which is water clarity. Chlorophyll A, which is a measure of microplankton, phytoplankton that's in the water. Qualitative macrophytes, which is just a way of saying a none, some, lots assessment of seaweed. And then temperature and salinity. So all the groups do tier 1 monitoring. And then 7 groups do tier 2 monitoring, which is continuous dissolved oxygen, which are these great loggers that we put out in the water and keep in the water for basically 6 months. And they take readings every 15 minutes for dissolved oxygen. Really important in shallow water systems, but also valuable in open water and deep water as well. Quantitative macrophytes are videos of seaweed on the bottom of the embayments, and then nutrients in nitrogen and phosphorus forms, various nitrogen and phosphorus forms. Happy to touch base on that in the Q&A. The season's 6 months long, May to October, so it just kicked off. And it's all conducted in compliance with an EPA-approved quality assurance project plan. It's fully funded by the Long Island Sound study at this point. Thank you very much, EPA and Long Island Sound study. And as such, it requires that they sign, the EPA signs off on a quality assurance project plan, which is a very dense, necessarily so, document that details everyone that's in the study, the stations that are monitored. It goes all the way down to the equipment used and the labs used and how we go about doing the monitoring with procedures. Very important document. And I know groups like DEEP appreciate having a QOP like that they can look at to kind of answer some of the questions they may have on how the monitoring is undertaken. It also helps us deliver very high quality data. And Save the Sound administers that, but all the groups that participate have been great in complying with it. And here we are. Here's where we are in terms of the embayments that are filled by the Unified Water Study. So we're in quite a few embayments, as you can see. I actually just switched computers and I can't get ArcGIS to work on my new computer quite yet. So I had to just add Flushing Bay with a little thumbs up, or a big thumbs up, I should say. That's our new group joining the UWS this season in the Western Narrows of Long Island Sound. But you can see we're in quite a few bays and harbors, and actually we are projected to continue to grow as the years move forward. We are doing a bit more on social media. I think I'll do a little pitch, kind of an older millennial or whatever you call us. But so I've got a little bit of a social media handle, but keep an eye out on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. All our groups are doing a bit more on social media and kind of getting the word out, and give us those thumbs up if you like what we're doing. Shameless pitch there, sorry. And we didn't just, all of a sudden 24 groups and 42 embayments. It took time. So as I mentioned, we started the development of this study in 2015, 2015, when we said, okay, we're going to take on the report card. And we started kind of the development of the report card in tandem. 2016, 3 very brave groups, at least one of them's on this webinar, agreed to pilot our procedures. We refined those procedures, which are, how we go about doing the monitoring, literally in the fields. And then in 2017, we officially launched with 11 groups. And as you can see in this timeline, I won't read everything in it, we've continued to grow from year to year to year to where we are now in 2021 with 24 groups, 42 embayments, and tier 2 monitoring in 13 of those embayments. And we have at least one group, SUNY Maritime, that's very likely going to be in the study next year, and another group in Central Connecticut that's looking to add Bridgeport and potentially another embayment too. So we're growing. right, so I want to get into a little bit, as was kind of put out there with the description of this webinar, of like what it means to do one of these studies. So one of the actually really important things with this study, and others as well, is station selection. We go through station selection with every single group in the UWS prior to them joining. And there's some kind of minimum requirements, like 4 stations in an embayment, for example. Here's Darien Harbor, and that's an example of 4 stations. We use these hexagon grids to space our stations out. We generate random stations in each grid, and then we go through them. We can't just totally go random, because with shallow water systems, you know, you've got shallow water where you literally can't get to with a boat at certain tides. But we go through those random stations and do our best to pick them to start. If we need to move them a little, we will. And you can see it's the same process, be a small embayment or maybe a slightly larger one like Flushing, our new group, on the other side of the slide here. But everyone goes through the station selection process with Save the Sound, our science advisors, Dr. Jamie Vaudry from UConn, and Dr. Krumholtz, who's now working out in Rhode Island, but was with URI and NOAA for quite a few years. Another really important part of getting the Unified Water Study to work is holding annual field and procedures training. Traditionally, we had done that in person. Obviously, the pandemic didn't allow that last year or this year. So we really like to do this in person, because we can go through calibrations of the instruments that are used in the study. We can go through how to use these filters, how to throw a rake, how to do, you know, all kinds of things. It's a whole day of training for each tier. And we moved it to an online module system, which has actually worked out pretty well. And we used it again this year. Even if we go back to full in-person trainings in the future, we will very likely continue to keep this module training in place and be able to reference people to, like, hey, take a look at section 4.2 on checking your SON depth calibration. And people can do that, and it's going to help us out with the technical support that we offer throughout the season, especially as we continue to grow. We haven't necessarily just kept adding staff to Save the Sound at the same time. So our environmental analyst, Elena Cologne, does a phenomenal job with the tech support. I do my best when I'm available. Our technicians do too. But having this module training has been great, because we can start referencing people back to the online training instead of getting on the phone for 15, 20 minutes walking through things. Not that we mind doing that, but I think you get the point. We also do field audits where we'll visit groups and go out and just kind of go through a full check of the procedures with them. Again, we had to do that via Zoom, which is a challenge at first. We'll get back to doing that in person as soon as we can. And these things are mandatory. They ensure quap compliance, good rake toss form. Everyone wants to be a good seaweed fishing person like Elena here. So important elements of our study. In addition, we loan out all the equipment and supplies that are necessary. I mean, we really do, down to like Right in the Rain paper and filter syringes that are used for chlorophyll filtering, and the little glass fiber filters that also have to go in and get water pushed through them. We loan out the big multi-parameter SONs that do the SON profiling or probe profiling for, you know, those tier 1 parameters I showed, the GPS units, all the standards, the DO loggers, everything really. And that has lowered the study expenses significantly. I mean, it's still expensive when you're buying, you know, 25 jugs of $300 turbidity standard, but you get good price breaks when you buy 25 opposed to, you know, the 1 or 2 that one group might need each season. It also is really helpful because we're all using the same stuff, so it really enhances comparability. The last 2 seasons, I want to point out, we've had to deliver this stuff. Usually we give it out at training, but we've gotten to loading up U-Hauls. Here's Elena, myself, and Sid, loading up 2 U-Hauls and taking them out to the groups to deliver all the equipment and supplies that they need. It's worked pretty well for us. We have a project laboratory. Again, that also lowers the expense costs, but it also strengthens data comparisons, and it helps with New York's requirements of ELAP certification, which is something that they want to see, especially for nutrient sampling. And we have a project template. So there's a lot of data, as you can imagine, that gets generated from all these monitoring groups. So this really gives us consistent final formatting when it's submitted to Save the Sound. It enables us to do lots of quality assurance checks that are built into the template. It's in Excel, but it's a really beefy Excel template, multiple tabs. It holds a lot of QA, QC type data that we want to see, like calibration, instrument calibrations, and all kinds of stuff that we really go back and reference, replicates, et cetera. And it also just is a place for them to enter data from their field data sheets, which they also, all the groups submit via SharePoint. So we can reference field data sheets while we're looking at their Excel entries. So it facilitates widespread data sharing. If everyone submitted the data in a different format, even if it was just slightly different, we would be lost. We wouldn't be able to handle it. So it helps us keep everything packaged up neatly. And at the end of a season where we're doing tier 1 and tier 2 data, for example, we're importing over 100,000 rows of data, and that's multi-parameters at times, into the EPA water quality portal, which is a national portal for water quality data. It's a requirement when you're federally funded, and we wouldn't be able to do it without this template. By the way, these data are available at this link. I'll give the presentation to Jimena so she can send it around. And you can also access the Excel spreadsheets and quickly take the data for your own uses. I guess that's a pitch, not a pitch, but something I want to point out is that if you are starting a program like this or smaller or larger, even whatever it is, keep this in mind. Jim Ammerman from the Long Island Sound Study, NUIPIC analyst with the Long Island Sound Study, shared this with a water quality monitoring group. And it's a great short reference to, and follow the link, please, to the importance of tidy data and how messy data can be a real pain to deal with, especially when you have lots of years of messy formatted data. And I'm not putting this up to show results in any means, but we generate with those kind of designed, very specific templates. We have these quick figure creations built in Excel where we can go in, and this isn't continuous data. It's just, discrete monitoring or on the spot monitoring. But for every single group, we have all the bottom DO, for example, we're going to have 42 of these at the end of the season. And we can go in and look for outliers and things that don't look quite right, and then go back to the field data sheets. And it's a really important QA process when you have this many spreadsheets coming to you. And the groups do a great job with QA first. We're just kind of the next line of QA defense, I guess you could say, before it gets pushed out to the states and the EPA database. All right, and I just have a couple more, Jimena. Hopefully I'm doing all right on time. I didn't keep an eye on my watch.
You're good.
We're good? Okay, great. How much time do I have, by the way?
Like 7 minutes.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. So data usage, really important for any monitoring program. So UWS data, we see it as it's included in roadmaps to prioritizing restoration of waterways that are degraded. And it's also really important for protecting waterways that have pristine water quality. The UWS open water site grades and the bay grades, they inform and engage the public. We package this report, the report card specifically is made to be able to engage as many people as possible, be it senators, which we do send it off to, elected officials, but also just anyone. You can really interpret a report card quickly. The A to F, it works. So it can inform and engage public. We're supporting EPA nitrogen strategies. New York State DEC, that's the Department of Environmental Conservation in New York. They have a Long Island nitrogen action plan, and we send data to them for consideration and usage on that end. I didn't put it in here, but we're also I'm submitting data to Suffolk County for their sub-watershed wastewater plan. I've been working on that technical group to help them just get their hands on all the data that we have available for nitrogen reduction decisions in Suffolk County. And then you're going to hear from Katie, but we also submit to the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection in Connecticut for their integrated water quality report, basically their Clean Water Act 305B kind of a necessary assessment that gets sent in to the EPA and essentially Congress. And I will point out the report card's been used by elected officials, recently senators, advocating for additional funds for Long Island Sound to the Appropriations Committee, for example. And it works, because people can easily interpret it. And we put a lot of time in making sure it was defensible. So seeing that I have maybe only 4 minutes now, I want to point something out. And it's always dangerous when you're doing a PowerPoint to do this, but the Unified Water Study and the open water grades and the beach data that I mentioned, they also exist on the Sound Health Explorer, which is a digital tool that Save the Sounds put out, so people can kind of dive in deeper into the data and what's available. I wanted to point out, the grades are here. We were talking about them. I was going to point out Mamaroneck. That's one that Director does for Tier 1. So you could go in, for example, to Mamaroneck Harbor, look at their 2018 grade, look at their 2019 grade. We do put the groups that do the monitoring here. They need to get that. We feel it's absolutely essential for them to get that recognition. So, go into a harbor near you and see who's involved. That's a great way for that volunteer also to see who might be doing work in their harbor, their local bay, and potentially get involved. I'd be happy to connect people to those groups. And you could go in and see charts and some other things as well. Point out, it's also really interesting to go into the open water because we have a little bit more of a data set there. And you could go and look at, 10 plus years of data. You could go to the figure and look at how the grades have done over the years. New York City is still getting an F. I won't just say New York City because it's not just New York City, but the waters around New York City and the Narrows are getting an F still. But when you really look in here, you can see that some of the indicators are getting better, statistically better, actually, like dissolved organic carbon, which is a great indicator of nutrient inputs. You can see it's gone from a 0 to almost a 50. So we're hoping that those other parameters will also kind of go up as nutrient reductions have gone down in the Western Narrows. So I showed Mamaroneck Harbor. When you look at and go into Mamaroneck Harbor, you can see we list challenges too. And I'm about to wrap up, but we show challenges for each bay and harbor, whatever they may be. And in this case, it's algal blooms from excess nitrogen and stormwater runoff, which is based on impervious surface percentages like roofs, roads, parking lots, things like that. Sound Health Explorer has a layer, I didn't show it, that shows the impervious surface percentage around each bay and harbor. And so we take those data. So I was talking with the Mamaroneck Board of Trustees not that long ago, and we brought a study that one of our science advisors and some other incredible scientists around the Sound put together on nitrogen loading into what Mamaroneck River, Mamaroneck Harbor. And you can see the green here represents the largest chunk of like the portion of the nitrogen load going into Mamaroneck Harbor, and it's fertilizer. And the Mamaroneck River watershed is massive. There's lots of golf courses, and open space can be deceptive because sometimes open space actually has a lot of fertilizer applied to it, or green space. So we were presenting and talking about the grade. I brought this up and referenced it. I said, look, cutting back on fertilizer could help you out a lot. That'd be my suggestion on a place to really start to focus in on cutting back on the fertilizer entering Mamaroneck River, which subsequently goes into Mamaroneck Harbor. And we see big mats of green seaweed, for example, and big algal blooms, chlorophyll blooms, phytoplankton, excuse me. And that's related to nitrogen and excess nitrogen. So that's a way that the village, who unfortunately, I mean, not unfortunately because they love it there, but they're at the bottom of Mamaroneck River where the watershed goes all the way up past White Plains. They could talk with these other municipalities and say, look, we got to cut back on fertilizer, nitrogen, coming from fertilizer. So one example of data usage, we talked to a few municipalities using this kind of format. And with that, I'm going to wrap up. Looking forward to hearing from Katie. We're not going to take a Q&A now. Let's save it. And I'll definitely stick around at the end and be available for questions.
Thanks so much, Peter. All right. So let me start sharing the presentation for you, Katie. And everyone, like I said, feel free to drop any questions you have in the Q&A window, and we'll get to those at the end of presentations. So whenever you're ready, Katie.
Great, thank you, Jimena. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you again, Jimena, for inviting me to present today on how the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection utilizes volunteer water quality monitoring data. Next slide, please. Under federal law, states across the United States are required to monitor and report on the status of their surface water quality every 2 years. The summary report of these assessments is known as the Integrated Water Quality Report. In Connecticut, we have over 6,000 miles of rivers and streams, 425 major lakes and ponds, and 612 square miles of estuaries, with just a staff of 8 to monitor both freshwater and estuarine resources. Next slide. How are we to assess everything? Next slide, please. These two maps were excerpted from the 2020 Integrated Water Quality Report. You'll notice that many more of our waters are assessed for the aquatic life use than the recreational use. Aquatic life use assessments can be based on benthic macroinvertebrate data, fish community data, and periphyton data in our freshwater systems, or dissolved oxygen data in our estuarine systems. Recreation assessments are based on beach closure information and indicator bacteria data. Next slide, please. However, there are still many river miles, lake acres, and estuarine square miles that are not currently assessed for one or more uses, as you can see by the red text box. Next slide, please. This is where volunteer water monitors make a world of difference. I love this political cartoon that was taken. Next slide, please. DEEP has a dedicated volunteer monitoring coordinator, Megan Lally, who's actually on the call as one of the participants today. And she oversees our freshwater programs. I assist our estuarine groups, although in a much less formal manner, especially with the UWS program fully implemented. DEEP has prepared documents to guide volunteer monitors through the process of developing a monitoring program, recognizing that groups will be in various stages of program development, have varying objectives for collecting data, and varying degrees of resources and expertise. These documents are available on our website or by contacting Meg or myself. Next slide, please. With these in mind, DEEP developed a three-tiered system. Tier 1 typically involves photo documentation over an extended period of time. Tier 2 data collection occurs without the preparation and implementation of a formal quality assurance project plan. Data collected under Tier 2 are suitable for many of the group's objectives, but cannot be utilized for regulatory purposes. Tier 3 data are data collected by groups with an objective of having a regulatory agency utilize the data. Data collected under Tier 3 are not automatically deemed suitable for those purposes, though. Tier 3 requires that groups prepare and implement a formal quality management system, including writing a QAP and standard operating procedures, the use of a state-certified laboratory for sample analysis, and submittal of data in a formal citable report to DEEP. To be considered for use in the integrated report, data must be submitted to DEEP by November 1st of odd years. Data collected by the UWS fall under Tier 3. The UWS system is especially nice for me, as I only have to review one QAP and one set of SOPs, one data submittal that is formatted according to DEEP standards, and I can reference the Save the Sound Health Explorer website that Peter just showed us. Next slide, please. And one more, please. One of our longstanding community science programs is our Riffle Bioassessment by Volunteers, or RBV program. Groups are trained by our volunteer coordinator to sample streams for benthic macroinvertebrates. In 2019, the latest year for which numbers are available, over 250 volunteers sampled 89 water bodies across 36 towns. Thanks to their efforts, 20 new segments were assessed as fully supporting the aquatic life use. COVID, of course, impacted the group's 2020 collections and results, but the program is gearing up for 2021. Next slide, please. Another state-led freshwater program is our VSTEM program, which monitors stream temperatures. The program assists with data collection for developing water temperature standards, identifying cold water habitat, and examining the impacts of non-point source pollution. Data from this program are entered into a regional database called SHEDS. Again, COVID limited the locations and number of groups participating in 2020. However, I believe 87 sites were monitored, and the program is again gearing up for 2021. Next slide, please. We're very excited. In 2021, we're offering a brand new program called Connecticut Lake Watch. Groups will collect Secchi disc readings on a weekly basis at their lakes after being trained by our staff. The groups will also be allowed and asked to report on any algal blooms that they may come across, and DEEP may follow up. Next slide, please. On the estuarine side, which is my expertise, the UWS is a major contributor of data to the state for use in the integrated report. There are also groups that are still conducting monitoring outside the UWS. For the 2016 and 2018 integrated water quality reports, data from 4 groups were used to assess the aquatic life use support in 15 segments, and the recreational use support in 20. UWS data were not available for the 2016 or the 2018 assessment. Next slide, please. For the 2020 report, Tier 1 data from the UWS were used to assess 22 segments for the aquatic life use and resulted in 1 segment being delisted. Data from 3 other groups were used to assess an additional 15 segments. Recreational use assessments based on community science data remained the same at 20 segments. 2019 UWS data will be utilized for the 2022 report. And I'm looking forward to Tier 2 continuous data as well. Next slide, please. Volunteer monitoring data can also be used for other purposes. In 2016, DEEP began a new process to develop plans to address designated use impairments, but also to protect areas with good water quality. The new process, called IWRM, or Integrated Water Resource Management, is heavily dependent on internal and external partnerships. IWRM is a renewed approach to focusing existing programs to achieve water quality goals while working within existing regulatory frameworks. Next slide, please. In Connecticut, the initial process prioritized watersheds with bacteria impairments, as well as nutrients and aquatic life use support. Next slide, please. The initial process selected priority areas utilizing an EPA-supplied tool called the Recovery Potential Tool, public feedback, and watersheds with active partners that we can engage. Next slide, please. Staff from our total maximum daily load division traditionally utilize modeling to determine load reductions needed for impaired waters to meet their designated uses. Through IWRM, we plan to update 2 of these models. The models will need high-quality data for calibration and validation. High-quality Tier 3 volunteer collected data are being utilized in the modeling effort. Next slide, please. Another example of DEEP utilizing volunteer collected data is in our Long Island Sound Study funded pilot project to examine the utility of mapping eelgrass habitat with a drone. The UWS Tier 2 macrophyte data may be used to assist with ground truthing our collected imagery. Perhaps one day, we may even be able to expand and develop a program similar to one on the West Coast, where community scientists actually collect the drone imagery data. Next slide, please. So to summarize, state agencies have limited resources, and we rely and appreciate community science data. Connecticut has developed a 3-tiered system for groups that have varying objectives and levels of expertise. Please keep up the good work and continue to send me your data. Next slide, please. Please feel free to contact Meg Lally or myself. Our contact information is listed here, along with a number of our websites for our volunteer monitoring program, our 305B report to Congress, and our Long Island Sound monitoring program. Next slide, please. And thank you. I have time for questions.
All right, great. Thank you so much, both. That was great. So like I said, please feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A. Let's see. Ariel, do we have anything? I was with the slides, so.
Looks like we have one question here. Can we get reports like that so we may also talk to our municipalities?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I responded to Deb, even though I wanted to fully pay attention to Katie. But I just realized that I responded to Jimena by accident in my rush there. So Deb, yeah, we'd be happy to do that with you for Niantic River, and let's loop in Jamie, and we could package up, the report card grade, and then also kind of like some quick information from the models she did with her colleagues. Absolutely. And then Bill, I'm happy to share the PowerPoint as a PDF afterwards. I can send it to you, Jimena. Katie's probably on board too, I would think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. All right. So in the meantime, like I said, feel free to add more questions, but I guess I would ask Peter, you've been doing the Unified Water Study since 2017, right?
Right.
So what are some major lessons, I guess I would say, that you've had in the development of this process and in the program, as it's developed and grown and everything?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, on a technical end, we've switched some of our equipment around a little bit for easier kind of user-friendly stuff and handhelds and such. We learned that it's hard to say. It's been a learning experience, but the planning that went into it was, I don't mean to brag here, but it was pretty thorough. And we had a lot of other people contributing. So like field audits, annual trainings, like those go so far, you know, and not everyone necessarily is like, oh, we're going to bring every single group together every single year to do training, because sometimes it's assumed like, hey, you know, they've been in the study for 2 years, they're going to be fine. And usually they are, but you know, it's important to do those annual trainings because new staff get hired, new people come on board. So I've learned that that's incredibly important, and I have no intention on dropping those anytime soon. And I've also learned that it's important for us to just keep that technical support element in place. I mean, oftentimes, you know, Katie can speak to this too. Like, I'm perfectly fine picking up the phone and calling YSI if one of our probes like really needs that tech support, but it's not always necessarily as immediate as like a UWS group's response would be from one of us, if that makes sense. So like Elena can get back to them a bit quicker sometimes than YSI, even though they have great customer support. Sometimes we're a little bit more on the spot and we could get things addressed quicker. And then if we need to loop in a manufacturer for any piece of equipment, we do that. So, you know, I don't know about learning as much, except like we won't be dropping those. And we did go to one lab. Okay, so I was digging deep. I was kind of killing some time there to think about. So at first we had 3 labs for our chlorophyll analyses, and we had to do split sampling to kind of check on the different labs and see if everything was comparable. I wouldn't recommend going back to that if anyone has multi-group sampling going on. It's very useful to have one lab. And now we ship chlorophyll overnight. So all the groups ship like FedEx overnight to Interstate Environmental Commission. And it really has kind of eased the process on the laboratory work.
Great. I imagine there's also a real value in terms of engagement, you know, and keeping them engaged by having these trainings every year too, I would think. So we have 2 more questions. Peter, do you ultimately plan on undertaking tier 2 monitoring for all embayments, and what are its advantages?
Well, I'll tell you, one of the disadvantages is that it's very expensive. So I don't know, and resource intensive. So I think the short answer to that would be, yes, we'd like to, but it'll likely always stay at a similar scale. So we moved, for example, the tier 2 monitoring in Southport, and this was planned, rotating type thing. But we moved the town of Fairfield tier 2 Southport data, collection into Black Rock Harbor. Right. So now town of Fairfield's back to tier 1, and then Black Rock Harbor has tier 2. And it's always had this kind of intention of that's like the extra monitoring that we do. We want to provide, you know, agencies like DEEP. So we're happy to move it around. So the short answer to that is not all at once, but we definitely look to rotate it and keep moving the resources that we have around to all the different groups. Because of course, lots of groups are interested and want to get involved in that level of monitoring. Someone asked also about groups using these data. A recent example would be that Black Rock group, referencing the report card, referencing the UWS data in Black Rock Harbor at public meetings, and using it to advocate for additional nitrogen reductions and improvements to their wastewater treatment plant. And then just kind of maybe saying, hey, let's stay online with plans we have, because we have this bay that's not doing so well right now. So that was, you know, a recent usage in a very public kind of meeting type of commentary type format.
That's really exciting to hear that people are taking the data and doing something with it like that. Yeah. This one's also for Peter. Thanks for the presentation, both. What do you use to measure nutrients, and what specific nutrients are you testing for?
Yeah, so we do filtered and unfiltered samples. So we're on the water, we have a pump. We do these 60 ml bottles, and we fill them with filtered and unfiltered water. And I should have them memorized, but there's like 6. So it's ammonia, let's say nitrate, nitrite, total nitrogen. There's another one I'm missing on the nitrogen, and then orthophosphate and phosphorus. And it takes a while. So we collect hundreds, literally up to this point, thousands of samples. So it takes a while to get those all, you know, packaged up and released, but they're coming out soon. If you had a specific question on any one parameter, though, I'm happy to answer that too.
All right, another question. Are there sensors available to report the big data / GIS collectors?
Hey, you want to answer that one? I wasn't totally clear on that one. Or you're muted, Katie. Of course.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not exactly sure what you mean. Are there sensors available to report to big data? There are apps like Survey 123. It's in ArcGIS Esri product. that you can utilize. There's EpiCollect. So there are different apps that can do that. In terms of being able to have, like, say, your YSI data directly sent to a GIS application, I don't think so.
It was an Esri collective. So that's an ARC, that's an ARC. So maybe what you're talking about, survey 1, 2, 3. There's also telemetry data. I don't know if that's what you're referencing to, where it's, we have loggers, but we release the data at the end of the season, like the Unified Water Study has loggers. We release the data at the end of the season. But like UConn, like Jim O'Donnell's program and some others have pretty high-tech loggers out in the water that like report like pretty much instantaneous to websites, which is pretty cool if that's what you're talking about. There's lots of different routes you can take to do that. I won't throw any vendors out, but look around, because you might be able to find some newer kind of manufacturers that have a slightly less expensive but very good instrumentation that also have telemetry at a pretty reasonable rate, where you could set up a site and get that data beamed right to it, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, they're clarifying. So the question was around the seasonal boating influence and of course COVID deep in New York City.
Gotcha.
So there's another question. I'm hearing more and more about blue carbon being a better carbon sink than even forest. How can we show that and the advantages of keeping our eelgrasses and other aquatic plants healthy and get that fact into the mainstream knowledge? That's a big question.
That is.
It's a great question.
I'm going to give that one right to Katie.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Oh, that's a great question.
That's a great one. Yeah.
Potentially, EPA has developed some new guidelines to look at ocean acidification and carbon sources for volunteer monitors. We actually held a series of workshops a few years ago, 2019 now. And so you could look at examining pH and total alkalinity are two parameters that are easy for volunteers to collect. Total alkalinity is quite difficult to analyze though, and it can be expensive. So that's one thing. As we move on and further explore the drone possibility, we could look at potentially utilizing volunteers to map habitats and document potential loss.
That's a good one. And then kelp too. Save the Sound's really gotten behind nature-based processes too, like growing sugar kelp in Long Island Sound. And you think about nitrogen and carbon removal through that process. So more kelp farms, and even in areas that aren't necessarily certified for like consumption of that kelp, which tastes good by the way, but consumption of that kelp. Like we're right now piloting as a contractor with New York State. We have 100 feet of kelp off of Hen Island in Milton Harbor, New York. In fact, it's going to come out of the water. I've really enjoyed being a kelp. I'm going to call myself a steward, not a farmer, because the farmers put in a lot of work. But a steward, and New York State's looking at, how can that kelp be used? It's not the first study that's done this, by the way, but what, nitrogen, like concentration in carbon, how much is it taken out of the water? Can we use it for fertilizer in upland New York farms and then get kind of a loop going on and reducing inorganic like nitrogen applications, for example. And more and more kelp, although it has to be at a pretty wide scale to be effective, could be a really efficient carbon remover and help with ocean acidification, help shellfish out. They really struggle as waters get more acidic, and also produce something that can create this kind of organic fertilizer application, which would be great. Not to say it can't be used for other things as well, but we've really been looking into macroalgae and advocating for more and more of that in Long Island Sound.
So there's another question here. What have you discovered about the benthic macroinvertebrate life?
That's a good one. I think Katie should take that one too, because I think you had a pilot, right, with the Long Island Sound Study Funds a year or two ago.
Yes, but I'm thinking she's perhaps referencing our freshwater RBV program, the slide that I showed about that. I don't know if Meg can type in the chat a little bit about that. I don't use too much of the freshwater benthic stuff. However, as Peter did just mention, we did have a pilot project that we're looking at benthic macroinvertebrates in estuarine waters. That's in its second year. We're developing an index to look at what the data are telling us. As far as the freshwater, so we have a lot of groups that go out and they basically go on a treasure hunt or a scavenger hunt, and they're looking for 4 of the most wanted species, EPT taxa. I'm not going to even try to tell you the scientific names for EPT. Mayflies, stoneflies, and caddisflies are the common names. And so if the groups are able to document a certain number of those 4 most wanted species, our analysts will look at the data and they may utilize that data to say that the water is high quality and it supports aquatic life use. In recent years, we've been able to document a lot more waters that are supporting our aquatic life use. They've been able to go to streams that we haven't monitored before. And so I would actually say if you would like more information to please contact our volunteer monitoring coordinator, Meg Lally, and she would be able to give you more information about the freshwater benthics.
And I'd be happy to share her contact info too when I send out the PowerPoints and everything. So I don't think I'm seeing any new questions. We do have another one, but I think this one was already answered about how groups have been using the data to start making water quality improvements. You did provide some examples there. So I think that we can wrap it up. It's 2:27, but I want to again thank our guest speakers so much for coming here today and answering everybody's questions and talking about water quality monitoring in the Sound. Everyone, thanks so much for joining us. The next community science webinar is on June 16, sorry, and it'll be on diamondback tarpons. So we hope you'll join us. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Good to see everyone.